This episode of America Fog of War is brought to you by Civil War Trails. Civil War Trails is the world's largest open-air museum, with over 1,300 sites to explore across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg Campaign turn by turn, paddle past Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote artillery positions. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure today. I am Colby Sumner, and this is America Fog of War.
Pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of...
The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender.
Was found a diary under the heading My Pledge. He had written these words: America must win this war. Therefore I will work, I will save, I will sacrifice, I will endure.
Hey everyone. Thanks for joining us again for another Hippocket History episode. I am Colby Sumner, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Brett Thomas. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. What's up?
Oh, man, I'm excited about getting to the second part of this first Manassas episode series here. Last week, we talked about, the fighting, the movement to contact from Washington, D.C., then to Centerville, and then on to Manassas, and then we talked about the fighting that takes place on Matthews Hill.
Yeah, and ultimately left off with a, so far, Union victory and success of clearing Matthews Hill. And I'm excited to get over to Henry Hill.
Yeah, so far it is shaping up to be a Union victory. McDowell's maneuver didn't go 100% according to plan, but that being said, end result's still the same, right? He's got Confederates retreating in front of him. He's just captured one objective there on Matthews Hill. He's getting ready to organize his army and finish off the Confederate forces that he's got, beyond the trees in front of him. But that being said, that was just the first half of the day. And like we said in the last episode, we often try to do this from the Union perspective. Today's episode is going to be almost impossible to do that with, because this battle, specifically the fighting on Henry Hill, but the first Battle of Manassas in general, really is... it's kind of taken over by one figure at the battle, and that's going to be Brigadier General Thomas J. Jackson. Now, Thomas Jackson we had talked about in the Mexico War Stories episode. So obviously, if you've heard that episode, you know what we're getting ready to say. But for those of you that haven't heard it, Jackson's aggressive as aggressive gets. You know
Absolutely
what I mean?
Tenacious.
Yeah, he wants to fight, and he wants to fight badly, right? Like he is. I often think of him almost like a modern version of what the mentality of the Marine Corps will become, and what it is today is, it's very aggressive. It moves fast. It's violent in action. It's half of that's intimidation, and Jackson had an understanding of that. You know what I mean? But I think he also he just loved to fight. You hear many accounts of Jackson being called, old blue light or whatever, because his eyes would get all glowy like when combat would hit. That's a unique thing. I liked to fight, and you did too, but there are guys that like the fight far more than me. And Bill from our Special Forces interview the other day on the debrief episodes, he's one of those guys. He's one of those guys for sure.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
to meet these people and to have served alongside of these guys.
You definitely want them on your side,
Yeah, to be able to see them in action and just walk amongst giants. Like, it's amazing to have been in service.
It is. It's incredible. And needless to say, that's to give you a refresher or catch you up on Thomas Jackson, that's him in a nutshell. Now, earlier in the day, this is 3 a.m., so quite a bit before all the fighting takes place on Matthews Hill. Jackson is going to be camped near Mitchell's Ford, far south of the Stone Bridge in Matthews Hill. He and his brigade are going to wake up. They're going to start getting ready to go. And then for 5 hours that morning, they're going to do nothing but march back and forth behind Bull Run, right? And that's due in large part to Beauregard's extremely confusing orders.
Where are we going?
Right. And this was a really big problem with the Southern forces there at Manassas, because apparently his orders were so confusing that in one set of orders, if whoever received them would have followed them literally, he would have ended up attacking Ewell's brigade, which is obviously a Confederate brigade. It would have been a friendly force, you know. So his orders are all over the place and hard to understand. And Jackson's marching his guys this way and that way, back behind Bull Run, trying to figure out what Beauregard wants of him. And this has an effect on everybody. I mean, you know what it's like, dude, when you're just, because that's happened to us before too. You know, hey, go here. You get here really quick and you wait. And then it's like, all right, well, no, wait, we got to go back here. And it's, 2 miles back the way you came from or whatever. And if you do that enough times, you start to get there's a weird vibe that takes over the company or the platoon or whatever element you're doing it in.
It gets to your head, and then it gets to everybody's head.
And then everybody's pissy and then also feeling bored and lazy and tired. Like that has a ton of effects. So in his book, Rebel Yell, S.C. Gwynn kind of sums up this mood that takes over, the brigade and Jackson himself. And I'm going to quote him directly from Rebel Yell. Quote, "A young artilleryman who had been assigned to Jackson's brigade found the general wearing a shabby gray coat and a cap pulled over his eyes. Quoting this artillerist, half sitting and half lying against the trunk of a small pine tree, he did not move as we approached. When we reported, only his lips moved with this brief and characteristic order. When the infantry moves, follow. We had not long to wait. At 9:30, they were ordered to march northwest to the Stone Bridge," end quote. So Jackson's known for not giving out a lot of detail in his orders, but even in that description, you can tell, man, like the despondency has taken over. Or not despondency, maybe is the wrong word to use there, but that negative mood that kind of takes over everything. It almost makes you like sleepy and lazy in a way. It's a weird thing, man. I don't know why it is that it comes in that form, but he's got his hat pulled down over his eyes. He's leaning against a tree, like, I could. It's even affecting him.
That's kind of funny, though. At the same time, with his history of fighting and how he handles and conducts himself, this is not an image that I would ever expect or think about from him, because at this moment, I'm sure maybe in the distance you can hear certain things happening or moving around or whatever the case is, and maybe other people who have never been in combat before could be riled up or a little bit excited, and he just has not a concern because he's not there yet. Like, yeah, if they move, follow, we'll get there.
Yeah.
It's coming. We'll be there.
Maybe that's the case, man.
Maybe so.
Anyways, that guy had said that they had gotten, at around 9:30, they got the orders to march northwest to the Stone Bridge. Well, on their way there, en route, Jackson's going to learn from a courier that Confederate troops are hard-pressed in a fight to the west of the Stone Bridge. Now, we had mentioned in the previous episode a few Confederate commanders that had made crucial decisions of their own accord, right? They didn't go seek orders from higher-ups kind of reinforcing their ideas. They just decided to do it themselves and went and took charge of the battlefield. Well, Jackson's going to do the same thing here. So like those other 4 commanders that we had mentioned in the last episode, Jackson is going to act without orders and lead his men on a brutally fast march to assist these Confederates that are being hard-pressed. Now, I'm going to make a little side note here. When I say brutally fast, Jackson is going to be known for marching his men fast. His men, the men under his command, are going to actually, not too long after this, earn the nickname Jackson's Foot Cavalry, because he's going to have them march so fast. There are records of people, like first-hand accounts, either from letters or diary entries, of people that had to march with Jackson, and it sounds miserable, man. Like the worst hikes ever.
I'm sure it's proud after the fact.
Right, like you're proud of it. You're proud of the nickname and stuff, but man, earning that nickname sucks.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that was a little side note. When I say brutally fast, these guys are hoofing it. One artilleryman recalled that they were running that distance like panting dogs with flopping tongues, with our mouths and throats full of the impalpable red dust of that clay country, thirsting for water almost unto death. So, yeah, they're dying. And listen, we had mentioned before, we were there in August shortly after the anniversary of this battle, and I got to tell you guys, that place is freaking hot. I'm a Floridian. I was born in Florida, and I can handle the heat. That place is hot in the middle of the summer, man. And it is clay, like red clay county, and you feel like you got it all over you by the time you get to where you're going. And that was just two of us walking together.
Yeah, and we weren't really hoofing it either. We were just going along at a good pace.
We definitely weren't running.
Yeah, nah, not like them.
So when they get there, Tommy, what are these troops under Jackson seeing?
What they're seeing is reality hits real fast. Now, this goes back to when we were there, and this is interesting too, because what Jackson and his brigade saw from their location was they emerged from the tree line. There's a wood line on top of Henry Hill, so like on the eastern, southeastern side of it. And as you come out of that tree line, you're going to see an opening, and it's just a beautiful opening, and you can see everything
clear across to Matthews Hill, man.
Yeah, you can see Matthews Hill. You can see it's basically like a plateau, wide open space, and
it's about 300 yards long. The plateau, you think? Isn't that what we came up with?
Yeah, it's nice though because it's wide open, but with the beautiful view, they have a full blown disaster coming their way because I'm sure in the distance on top of Matthews Hill, you can clearly see
a huge Union force just over there hanging out.
Yeah, and one of Jackson's soldiers recalled, the wounded commenced passing us, some with blood streaming down their faces, some with legs broken and hobbling along, assisted by a comrade, and some seriously wounded and borne on stretchers. Previously, McDowell's plan to sweep from the Confederates' left would have opened up the Stone Bridge. This is now a reality. He's got Union forces coming across the Stone Bridge. They're linking up with the attack and the move to push into Henry Hill. Their arrival under William Tecumseh Sherman, also
a legendary commander from this war. He's going to go on to do huge things in putting an end to the war. And he's even, it's not his first time in combat, but it's his first time with that many troops in combat, and they're all brand new too.
Right.
So, crazy place to be, man.
Crazy place to be, but his initiative coming across the bridge also contributes to the full retreat from Matthews Hill. Brigadier General Bernard B., who we mentioned in the Mexican War story, Hippocket, he's one of the Confederate commanders retreating off of Matthews Hill. He rides to meet Jackson at the head of a column, and he says, "General, they're driving us." In what looks like a bloody defeat, Jackson replies, "Sir, we will give them the bayonet."
Yikes.
And Jackson meant business. So his reaction certainly was instinctive. And he's going to fight. He's going to fight now, and he's going to hold the line.
I mean, that's crazy, dude. That's crazy. We're going to give him the bayonet. I mean, that's very much like Leonidas telling Xerxes, when Xerxes is like, all you got to do is surrender your arms. We can put this, we can settle this peacefully at Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans. Xerxes says this to Leonidas, their commander, and he replies in a laconic phrase named after the Spartans, "Come and take them."
Right.
Put down your arms. Come and take them.
Even though it looks terrible for them.
Right.
Come and take them.
That's exactly what Jackson's doing here. They're driving us. We'll give them the bayonet. It's so vague, but also so specific. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm fighting. Yeah, if they overwhelm us, we'll just hit them with a bayonet. You know what I mean? That's hardcore.
That's hardcore, but that's leadership at its finest.
It is. You need, and especially in a situation like that, that's exactly what you need at that time. So Jackson, riding at the head of his column, this is going to extend 4 abreast. So to give you guys an idea, a column is what you march in, right? Those are lines from front to back is how they line up. So each man would line up directly behind the guy in front of them, and they would be 4 ranks deep, or 4 rows parallel to each other. That's when they talk about that. His column extends 4 abreast. There's 4 rows of these lines. When you go into battle, you're in like a battle line formation. Those are two lines where people are set up shoulder to shoulder, right? And it's made up of 2 rows in the same direction, but front to back. So there's just 2 columns, like 2 rows of infantry lined up, side by side, left to right. That's how they would march into battle. But marching to the battle site like that is not going to be efficient. You won't be able to get anywhere any kind of way fast, So to be able to use roads and stuff, they crunch up into what you'll hear referred to as a column. It's a marching column.
Interestingly enough, though, we still practice the same thing.
Stuff to this
day. You show up on Parris Island today, you're going to be practicing the same movements, the same columns, the same marching, everything about it. And it's really, in the beginning, you may wonder, why exactly are we doing this? But then
That's
realize
where you get the discipline from, though, man.
Yeah, you get the discipline, the unit cohesion, and then everybody who
the esprit de corps.
Yeah, you turn sloppy kids into
war fighters,
and they're operating together in one solid movement. It's incredible. So that's still going on today, and that's just incredible that they did it back then.
It is, man. It is. It's no secret that Brett and I have been friends since we were 18 and in the first year of our enlistments. Well, a few years ago, we decided that we needed to see each other with more consistency than we had been up to that point. But it would have to be a trip of some kind because we lived on opposite ends of the country. For us, there was no better way to spend our time together than being out on one of the many battlefields all across the country. We would take 2 trips a year, each of them just for a few days, and go park the car, get out, and walk a battlefield like Antietam or Gettysburg. And we'd have a blast. It's on one of those trips we decided to start America Fog of War. Walking America's battlefields in the footsteps of the men that fought the battle is the best way to learn the legacy of the American warrior and to really appreciate the sacrifices they made. Brett and I both still do it, and although it's usually for researching the subject matter of our show these days, it's still fun. If you're interested in following the Army of Northern Virginia's invasion into Maryland, or its retreat after the defeat at Gettysburg, or Grant's 1864 Overland Campaign, then I highly recommend checking out Civil War Trails. I've been a fan of Civil War Trails and what they do since Brett and myself started doing these battlefield trips all those years ago. They're an awesome organization. They make historical interpretation of the American warrior's legacy easier to access and enjoy for everyone. If you'd like more information on Civil War Trails and what they do and all the different sites that they have for you to explore, then go check out civilwartrails.org. Find a battlefield or a site that you want to visit and stand in the footsteps of the men and women that made this country what it is today. So he's got this column of infantry 4 abreast behind him, and they're in the woods behind him on the southern downslope of Henry Hill. And he's observing all this going on, and he runs into a Confederate artillery officer who's pulling along 3 cannon from a battery that was in the fight earlier. This Confederate artillery officer is not panicked like the others that are retreating around him. He's more so kind of pissed off at General Bernard B. In his mind, he feels like Bernard B. had left him out by himself to face off against the entire Union Army, essentially. While everybody else retreated. But in fact, B had sent him orders to withdraw 45 minutes before this, and the messenger got killed en route. So, that's, again, something that seems like it's simple to get me some orders to get me out of here, man. Could have been handled like they were in this case, and then, the battlefield got in the way of that. And it's not like these guys have radios or GPS or any of that stuff. They're having to do this by handwritten message with a man on horseback taking it to you.
It certainly doesn't always go as planned.
No. So anyways, Jackson rides into this guy. His 3 remaining guns are almost out of ammunition, and many of his horses have been killed. So he's retreating. He's going to the rear. He's trying to resupply, get some more ammo, get some more men, some more horses, maybe get back into the fight after that. Jackson tells him, though, unlimber right here. I'll support your battery. Now, this artillery officer is going to protest. He's going to be like, sir, I only got 3 rounds left for each of my guns. I think I should go resupply before I try to get into a fight. And Jackson is going to answer, and the reason why he answers this way is Jackson knows he's got to make a show of force on these Union soldiers, right? It's going to be real hard to deter an attack or seem intimidating for an attack if he doesn't have any cannons. If he's just got infantry in the trees, the Union Army is going to go right through him like a knife through warm butter. That being said, Jackson's going to look at this artillery officer and say, not now. Wait till the other guns get here, and then you can withdraw your battery, right? So let me have your guns, even if you don't have any ammo. Let me have them as a show of force. Let me make myself look intimidating and hold this advance up a little bit.
These are incredible decisions made within split-second decisions.
Man. He's seeing all this and having to decide this immediately.
Right, and in a tactical way, which is impressive. Can you explain exactly what unlimbering is? Because today we call it dismount.
Yeah.
What is this?
So to give everybody a heads up here, a limber is a two-wheeled horse-drawn wagon. And this is what cannons are going to be attached to for transport. I'm sure you've seen them in like period piece movies where they got cannons riding behind horses. They're going to be a little different, though, in real life because these limbers are going to be drawn by 6 horses, right? So each cannon gets 6 horses to draw them. Usually on a movie, you might see 2. Now, unlimbering meant detaching the cannon for action, right? Like taking the cannon off of the horses and getting it ready to shoot and set up to shoot. But that being said, to give you guys one more little heads up, now I said it's a limber if it's attached to the cannon itself, right? If that's what it's transporting. A battery would also have ammo and resupplies for the cannon. And when the horses are transporting the supplies, those are called a caisson, right? So it's either, if it's supplies and ammunition, it's a caisson. If it's a cannon being transported, it's a limber. And again, even the caissons are going to have 6 horses each, right, to pull them. So in a single battery, you're looking roughly around 100 men or more, maybe 70 horses or more. So I mean, it's a pretty big ordeal. Now this guy doesn't have a full battery; he's only got his 3 guns. But that being said, that's still a pretty substantial force to be able to have the men to operate those weapons and then the horses to pull them. Getting back to what we were talking about, Jackson's told this artillery officer to stay, and now he's going to select his defensive position. And what he chooses is extremely unorthodox. Almost any other general in this time is going to make the textbook decision to deploy their batteries, their cannon, at the northern edge of Henry Hill. That's closest to the enemy. They have cannons that shoot less of a distance than the Union troops do anyways, so to get closer it's beneficial for them, right, to be able to shoot within range.
Right.
And then have the infantry as well on the high ground behind them, more towards like the center of the hill. That's not what Jackson does, though. Jackson's going to decide to set up his men on the reverse slope. Instead of that northern edge, he's going to set up along the southern edge of Henry Hill, and he's going to keep his infantry back in that tree line. Now, this is going to be a brilliant tactical decision, and part of me even wonders if it was intentionally done. It's so brilliant that I don't know if he accounted for all these things that were going to happen from it, or if he did, because as we'll see time and time again, the man makes great decisions in combat, except, until the point that he no longer does, which we'll see later on in this season. But right now, this call he makes is going to have a few effects on the way this battle plays out. Jackson's men are going to set up in the tree line, like I said. Well, they're going to be in cover and concealment. Most of these Union troops that are shortly after this going to be making an advance towards Henry Hill aren't going to even realize there's infantry in those trees. Like, there's only a few regiments that are going to make their way out of the trees in this initial engagement between Union and Confederate forces. Even better, Jackson's cannons, right, which are going to be what this Union army is moving towards. If you go there and see it today, you'll see they're a little further away from the trees. They're out in front of the tree line. But his cannons are going to be able to roll forward over the lip of the hill, fire, and then be carried back to safety by the recoil of the cannon shot onto the downward slope under some kind of defilade, some kind of cover from like enemy return fire, so they could reload without being harassed by the enemy. Now, this isn't like, I'm not saying that the slope is that great where they're like not getting shot at all, but it's, if you have the choice of being up on even ground with a cannon shooting back at you, or if you have the choice to be, down a gentle slope a little bit, where at least half of your body might not be under threat of being shot by canister or some kind of terrible projectile, it's an advantage.
It's an advantage. It's a game changer. And at the same time, all this is happening, whether he did it on purpose or not, he doesn't have the whole Confederate army with him. He's
just
there.
His command. It's a brigade.
His command, yeah.
So that being said, he's set up in an awesome place. Just to reiterate, it's a big plateau and it is wide open, right? When you get out of the trees on that southern edge, you can see everything. And his cannons are going to have the same kind of field of view for the advancing Union soldiers. So when these Union soldiers do crest that northern side of Henry Hill, they'd have to cross a 300-yard opening to reach them. Wide open space at the mercy of all kind of terrible things flying through the air.
Right. And so Union artillery with their rifled cannons are firing across the hill. as Jackson, he's
Now let's touch on that, because the reason the Union can reach out and touch them from that far away with their artillery is because of that rifled cannonry, right? So it can shoot farther than what the Confederates have at their disposal.
Yeah, so they're launching them. They're lobbing them out there, and there's Jackson on horseback moving up and down along his lines as he's under fire. So he's carefully packed the tree line and the woods to the center and both of his flanks with 5 Virginia regiments.
By this time, Beauregard and Johnston have figured out that the battle is not going to happen the way they thought it was going to happen. So they make their way over to Henry Hill. They immediately see the logic of Jackson's position, and they try to reinforce him with everything they can.
And the first thing they're going to do is supply him with more guns, more cannons.
More cannon, yeah.
Yeah, Jackson at this point now has about 13 guns at the edge of the woods, all under his command. He's in charge of this. All the while, Jackson's busy placing his men, his artillery on Henry Hill. There's a large wave of Union troops on Matthews Hill just to the north, and they have not made any movements. Nothing, kind of like stalling, really, while Jackson just casually sets everything up.
So from around 12 o'clock, when the last Confederates are kind of retreating off of Matthews Hill and out past, behind the safety of Henry Hill, the Union Army haven't done anything. They've just kind of stayed on Matthews Hill. That's what you're saying. They pause up there.
They pause up there, lob a few rounds, let them know we're still here, kind of thing. But they paused until about 2:30. Union Army starts getting on the move, and just like Napoleonic armies of the past, they advanced their artillery out in front of their infantry. This is going to cause the first interaction between the two forces at Henry Hill, and it's going to be about an hour-long artillery battle.
Whew. I can tell you that is something I would not want to participate in.
No, because we're talking about cannons that are face-to-face almost.
Dude, and when they get that close, it's nasty business what comes out of the end of those things.
Yeah, so 2 Union batteries with 11 guns cresting the northwestern side of Henry Hill are now only within 300 yards from Jackson's line. In artillery terms, 300 yards is just point-blank range. And with canister shot and whatever else they had, it would have been a nightmare to be anywhere on that plateau in that moment when these cannons decide to face off.
Because listen, canister, just for those of you that don't know yet, canister rounds consisted of these 10 cylinders, right? 10 being the metal, TIN. These balls, essentially, they're about the size of a ping pong ball. And if that's not canister, if I'm misspeaking, I apologize. There is a certain shell that has a smaller BB in it, and then there's one that has a huge ball in it, like the size of like I said, a ping pong ball. And there's a bunch of them packed into this iron shell casing, right? When they shoot it at infantry, it works like a gigantic shotgun, essentially, sending ping-pong-sized metal balls flying through the air.
It's like birdshot for people.
Dude, you talk about the worst experience to have to face down. I can't even imagine that crap. That's just insanity to me. And these guys are within 300 yards and just going ham with it at each other.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely insane. But they, at the same time, the way that this battlefield is set up, they may have approached their guns up where they did, the Union guys and their batteries, really maybe not even fully knowing that there are 13 guns
sitting there waiting
right on the opposite side.
Yeah. I have a quote here from a guy in a Virginia regiment that's there on Henry Hill, and he is concealed within the trees behind this line of rebel cannons. And I just want to give you kind of an idea of what he was saying was happening during this time in the battle. Quote, William Patterson shot with a cannonball through his breast, killing him instantly. Ben Brady struck on the right hip with a piece of bombshell. He lived for 5 or 6 minutes. Charlie Bell was killed with a piece of that same bomb, lived about 2 hours. His whole right shoulder was torn off. End quote. I mean, good Lord, dude.
Just ripping people apart.
Listen, and then we could go down the rabbit hole of talking to like the slower velocity of these weapons back then and how much just crushing devastation they would do to you. Also, the sound those things would make flying through the air. Like a fast round makes a scary sound, but the slower that round goes and the bigger it is, sounds way, way more scary. You know what I think about when we were at SOI? I mean, we have plenty of combat. We could talk about getting shot at by various different types of rounds and this, that, and the other. But the one thing sound-wise that I think of the most when I think of things like this is at SOI, We had already done our MOS breakdown, and we were training to be assaultmen in the Marine Corps. And we were going through our demolition portion. And we went out and blew up I think it was a 155 artillery barrel. Remember they had the artillery barrel out there?
Oh, yeah.
And we put a bunch of
mud pit.
Yeah, we put a bunch of C4 in that joker, dude.
Yes.
And I mean a bunch. A few satchels, I'm pretty sure. It was a ton. And we got into this, the bomb, like the blast shelter and stuff, and fire in the hole, fire in the hole, fire in the hole. Boom. Do you remember the noise that chunk made, the one that flew? Listen, this bomb shelter was probably, what, you think 100 yards, 100, 200 yards away from where the actual explosion was taking place?
Yeah, I'd say 100 yards with the opening facing away.
Right. Well, a huge chunk of that artillery barrel got blown maybe 100 yards past us, directly over the top of that.
It was like a bunker thing.
Yeah.
It was like a concrete bunker, and that thing just like line drived right over.
Dude, and do you remember the noise that thing made?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so deep. It sounds like a freight train, but it's like a slow, grumpy freight train. You know what I mean? Just ready to hurt something. And that's what I think about when I think about these guys having to deal with, like, things that are moving at this velocity, just over and over and over again on this battlefield. Had to sound insane. Had to sound crazy.
And just like us, they had never seen it before.
Exactly. So they're going through a lot. Both sides of this engagement are really getting the full spectrum of combat. Do you love America Fog of War and want more of it? If so, Brett and I would love it if you became a member of the America Fog of War Patreon. Visit americafogofwar.com and follow the link Become a Member located in the menu at the top of the homepage, and pick from one of our 3 membership subscription options. As a member, you can enjoy ad-free early access to all of our free episodes, like this one, as well as gain access to not 1, but 2 extra episodes a month. Your membership subscriptions are what enable us to bring you the content you love every month. Help us grow this podcast and become part of the team today at americafogofwar.com.
Throughout this artillery duel, Jackson, in typical fashion, he's riding up and down the Confederate lines on horseback, repeating things like encouragement and just talking to his men as usual, saying things like, "Steady, men, all is well." People observe these moments, and from one soldier who really greatly admires Jackson and how he moved about, he had said, "In a shower of death, as calmly as a farmer about his farm when the seasons are good."
That's how Jackson was moving around the battlefield.
That's what this soldier thought of him as to how he, under fire, is handling himself.
That's pretty freaking calm.
It is. Right. So, yeah. And at one point, Jackson, he's going to thrust his left hand into the air in a gesture of prayer, like your palm, up to the air. Yeah. And an observer said that suddenly he jerked down his hand, and I saw that blood was streaming from it. He went on to say, "General, you are wounded." And Jackson replied, "Only a scratch, a mere scratch," and quickly dressed his own wound with a handkerchief. He then turns and continues riding towards his line, giving his men direction and encouragement as he had done previously.
Just getting after it. So at 12:30, just to kind of sum up what all has taken place up to the point of the story we're at now. Earlier on at 12:30, he had repulsed a brief attack on his right by a Union brigade that had entered the battle by crossing the Stone Bridge. Now he split Jeb Stuart's 300 cavalry, Jeb Stuart being a Confederate, by the end of this war, a very famous Confederate cavalryman, J.E.B. Stuart, Jeb Stuart. He's going to take his 300 men and deploy them on both sides of his flanks, right? So the left side and the right side, he's going to split them up. So they're going to have about 150 guys, cavalry guys on each wing of their flanks. He did that so that he could be kind of keeping an eye out for any advancing Union columns, because earlier, like I had said, he had to fight off a brief attack made on his right flank by some Union soldiers. Well, it wasn't long after that a courier from Stuart, Jeb Stuart, rides up and finds Jackson, tells him Union infantry is moving in on his left, and Jackson just replies, "Good, good." That's the way I wanted it to go. Like you can kind of see him like just he's talking to himself almost, like, "Good. That's good." Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because it is exactly what he intended. The enemy hadn't seen him. Right. They haven't seen him. They haven't seen his men in the woods. And soon a fight is going to pick up between one of his regiments on his left flank and 2 Union regiments. The Federals had initially mistaken these Confederate troops for their own troops, which made this interaction just far worse. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, because the mix-up of the uniforms caused massive confusion on the battlefield, especially this being the first major battle. Newly formed volunteers on both sides had arrived with whatever uniforms they had or what they were given. So there was no uniformity as there is today. There's no formal recognition.
Right. You got Union guys wearing gray and Confederate guys wearing blue. I'm pretty sure Jackson's still wearing his U.S. Army uniform in this battle.
Yeah.
You've got guys wearing red and green and all kind of colors, man. It's just a confusing mess out there, and it's all brand new dudes.
All brand new dudes. And you know what the funny thing is? With everybody being so brand new, that really just makes it so much more difficult on the chain of command, because everybody... You really got to watch everybody and make sure everything's done right. But in the mix of it, there's always problems, because on many occasions during the back and forth fighting on Henry Hill, there would be entire regiments that would either withhold their fire so they wouldn't inflict casualties on friendlies, or they did fire upon friendlies by mistake. It was just total chaos. But even on top of the uniforms being a problem, the early national flags were similar colors as well, for both Union and Confederate. So you're at a distance, or through any kind of smoke or haziness or confusion, their flags were even being mistaken.
Man, that's crazy. That's and back then, battle flags aren't as big of a deal now. The uniforms would definitely be. I mean, especially in a conventional war, that would be an issue if you couldn't tell friendly from enemy forces. But nowadays we don't really think about battle flags and stuff as being a big deal on the battlefield, because they're mainly symbolic things that you keep around, like the headquarters and stuff. You know what I mean? Your guidon and all that. Back then, it's a different story. That's how they used to line up for that. They line up off of flags. They know where their unit is based off of the flag and how far they should be advanced or back, or whatever's going on in the unit next to them. They know where to line up off of them based off of that unit's flags. Well, if the enemy flags are the same as the friendly flags, or at least close enough to be mistaken for being the same, you got a problem on your hands. Because I got to tell you too, it's also, like you had mentioned earlier, the smoke and stuff. It's super smoky on these battlefields, man. The munitions that they used in this era created a lot of smoke, and the cannons are going to create tons of smoke, and then you got horses kicking up dust and infantry kicking up dust and all kind of, dude, you wouldn't be able to see anything. I'm almost positive of it. If you were anywhere near that fighting, it had to have been so hard to see, and I can see that just making that fight so much more miserable, man, because that's the lose-lose. You hold your fire, you get killed, right? You shoot too early, you might kill some of your friends. Like, there's no upside to that. You know what I mean? Like, either decision you make, it's a tough thing, and these guys are really going through it.
It's a tough thing, and we're going to see it multiple times on Henry Hill.
So the Virginians will eventually drive back the Federal advance, that initial advance that they had made on Henry Hill. As they retreated towards the Sudley Road, Confederate General Jeb Stuart, along with his detachment of 150 cavalrymen, are going to slam into them, and they're going to really do some devastation, because one thing that you will learn from this era and eras earlier on, and I'm sure it's still true to this day, that most of the damage is done in the retreat. Most of the casualties on these older battlefields, like big number casualties, are going to happen from a routed unit, right? And they get really jacked up and when they're retreating, because there's no cohesion, there's no formed up line. A lot of them will get shot in the back, or chased down by cavalry, like this is happening.
Yeah, you lose all fire superiority. And
yeah, exactly. It's just chaos. You're just running at that point. So I wanted to point this out, because this was really an interesting quote to me. But one of the horsemen in Stuart's cavalry is going to describe killing a Union soldier. And, just a little bit before this, they were fellow countrymen. And the way he puts this quote together it really stood out to me. So here we go. Quote, "I leaned down in my saddle, rammed the muzzle of my carbine into the stomach of my man, and pulled the trigger. I could not help feeling a little sorry for the fellow as he lifted his handsome face to mine while he tried to get his bayonet up to meet me. But he was too slow, for the carbine blew a hole as big as my arm clear through him." End quote. Talking about his handsome face looking up at him and stuff. That, there are things that just stick in your mind. Like you've mentioned it a few times. We just remember moments. Well, there are some moments And it's as focused as it would be if it was just a picture, right? You don't get any more than just a frozen frame, boom, of this one thing, but you remember those things, and that really just stands out to me. The guy, you know, they were the same, you know, they're from the same country, and this is the first big battle, man. So this is still fresh, and as excited as they are to fight, when it comes down to killing, you know, the excitement kind of, I mean. Not that you can't finish the job or do it. This guy obviously followed through on what he was expected to do. But there is a difference between thinking about it and then actually doing it. You know what I mean? And
Certainly.
And yeah, I just thought it was a very interesting quote. But the Federals, they're not finished. You know, they've had a little bit of a setback, but they're going to advance again on Jackson's line. And this time they're going to bring 2 howitzers with them, and they're going to place them less than 200 yards from the Confederate line, which is freaking close, dude. Now, alarmed by this Federal gun emplacement that's just shown up, you know, less than 200 yards away, is a Confederate commander, Colonel A.C. Cummings. He's in charge of the 33rd Virginia Infantry Regiment, and he's going to order a volley that cuts down large amounts of men and horses from this Union force that's just moved these 2 howitzers up. Then he and his Virginians are going to charge across the open ground, and before anybody really knows what happens, the rebels have seized the Union battery, and they've pushed whatever remaining, you know, Union guys were there off of them and taken control. And this is the first Confederate victory of the day. Needless to say, the Confederates do end up taking those cannons, but they won't be able to hold them for very long. They're out in the open. They're in advance of the rest of their line. So really, this position just can't be held. You know, they're on their own out there. But this is the first Confederate victory of the day, like I had said earlier, and it's going to be the turning point in the battle. The Confederate forces, Jackson and his, you know, Spartan-like last stand there on Henry Hill has stopped this wave of blue soldiers, and they won't go any further than where they got just then. Now, Jackson at this point has repulsed attacks on his right and on his left. His artillery had been devastating against the larger enemy. And most of his men hadn't even fought yet. They were still in the woods, invisible, laying flat on their bellies, just hanging out, waiting to get into the fight. A little bit shell-shocked, I'm sure, because they've been having artillery just scream over their heads the entire time. But it's about this time that Bernard B., that's one of the commanders of the forces that were fighting on Matthews Hill that had retreated. He's going to be... He has been busy since that retreat, and it's around this time that he's going to locate what remained of his brigade. Now, when he comes up on him, he's so out of it himself, he's not even going to realize that those are his men. They're going to have to tell him, you know, hey, yeah, we're your guys. He's going to come up and ask, what regiment is this? And they're going to have to tell him, hey, we're your regiment, man. Like, it's us. You don't recognize us. B's going to ask them to rejoin the fight with him. And out of those men, he finds 100 men are going to, you know, give him a yes. Like, yeah, we'll come get back in the fight with you. And it's at this point that Bernard B. is going to point to his left towards the wooded tree line on the edge of Henry Hill, and he is going to say one of the most famous sentences recorded throughout the entire war. And it's going to give Thomas Jackson the name by which most people still know him to this day. Definitely during this era, and most likely if you've ever heard his name, it's with this nickname. But B is going to look. He's going to look over there. He's going to point towards Jackson's position, and he's going to say, "Yonder stands Jackson like a stone wall. Let's go to his assistance." And from that point forward, Thomas Jackson was known as Stonewall Jackson. I mean, you know, that is just one of those things. Listen, there's a lot of argument back and forth on that too, whether or not Bernard B. was saying that in a praising way or in a derogatory way. You know, he's just standing there like a stone wall and not doing anything. Why doesn't he go? But listen, honestly, at this point, we know he said something to that effect, and it's just a cooler story if you believe the more commonly accepted version, which is he was praising Jackson, because it flows right into the nickname. So, what happens from there?
Yeah, so a New York regiment from Brooklyn known as the Red-Legged Devils, they're going to fire upon the Virginia regiment that's holding the cannons. The 33rd Virginia, losing a third of its men, they're going to have to retreat from the guns that they had just charged and captured. So up to this point, it's been mostly an artillery duel, and the Union really believes that they've won the fight. The 33rd Virginians' charge against Union cannons marks the start of an infantry against infantry engagement on Henry Hill. Because of this, Jackson realizes his left was collapsing, and the Union troops from New York were now heading straight towards the Confederate center, where 2 more of Jackson's regiments were positioned, out of sight in the tree line. They had been on their bellies in the woods for many hours, as you had said before. I can only imagine the adrenaline dump that they're receiving while they're just laying there. It's got to be absolutely insane. But as these events unfolded, Jackson knew he's going to be set up for success. And with his excited confidence, he's moving along the lines again, and he states, "Reserve your fire until they come within 50 yards. Then fire and give them the bayonet. And when you charge, yell like furies." As instructed, his Virginians, they open up with a hellacious rumble of canister and musket fire as these New Yorkers are moving forward towards them at their center. The Federals are struck and driven back by the massive devastation, but they regroup and they attack again with the same tragic results. Determined to continue the push and further move the Confederates back, Union troops again attack a 3rd time, but this time they make it within a few yards of Jackson's line in a very close and grueling face-to-face fight. Unfortunately, they're going to pay for it with their lives because at such a short range, the Virginians, they just shattered the oncoming waves of men, and the remaining survivors, they break the line and they fell back. Being a U.S. Marine and fighting for my country is one of the things in my life I am most proud of. Although there are so many positives that came from my experience in the Marine Corps, like many of you, I had another battle I had to fight when my service was done. It's no secret that PTSD affects many active duty and former servicemen and women every day, as well as their family members and the first responder community. If you or a family member is struggling with PTSD, Colby and I recommend looking into the Mighty Oaks Foundation for help in your battle with this condition. The Mighty Oaks Foundation is a faith-based veteran service organization that teaches combat veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress how to get beyond combat trauma and live their lives in the manner God intended. Many combat vets are unable to reintegrate back into civilian life, leaving their families to deal with the aftermath of broken homes and suicide at times. By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these warriors are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. Their mission is to serve and restore our nation's warriors and families who have endured hardship through their service to America, and to help them find a new life purpose through hope in Christ and their resiliency and peer-to-peer recovery programs. More than 4,000 alumni have participated in Mighty Oaks programs, as they maintain one of the highest success rates of any recovery program in preventing veteran suicide and divorce. In fact, the programs are so successful that they receive hundreds of active duty military on official orders each year. Additionally, through a proactive effort, Mighty Oaks has provided resiliency programs to over 150,000 active duty troops on military bases worldwide. Find more information on the Mighty Oaks Foundation by visiting americafogofwar.com and follow the link Mighty Oaks Foundation located in the menu at the top of the homepage. Never fight alone. Get some backup in your fight with PTSD today.
Well, listen, we're getting ready to have another pretty historical moment come up in this battle because, as you had stated before, Jackson tells them when they charge, yell like furies. Well, at this point, Jackson's going to order his artillery from the field to clear way for the infantry. He's going to ride over to the commander of the 4th Virginia Regiment and will tell him, order the men to stand up, we'll charge them now and drive them to Washington. Obeying their orders, the Virginians are going to sweep across that plateau that we've been talking about this whole time on Henry Hill towards the retreating Union soldiers and towards those Federal batteries on the far edge of Henry Hill. Now, this yell that they come up with is going to be something that troops on either side have never heard before. It was the result of each man giving a sequence of 3 sounds. And I've heard some recordings of older, men, when they're Confederates, when they're much older. I think it's in like the 1920s, give their version of the rebel yell. And this is kind of the breakdown of it. But essentially, it's 3 separate screams or screeches that they do. When you get a bunch of people doing it, I could only imagine how terrifying that thing sounded. So collectively, this noise, this yell that these guys are doing across Henry Hill is going to be what becomes known as the rebel yell. As one federal soldier is going to put it, there is nothing like it on this side of the infernal region. The peculiar corkscrew sensation that it sends down your backbone can never be told. And I could only imagine that's the effect that, thousands of screaming men like they're, hyenas essentially sounds like when it's coming at you. And this practice of the rebel yell, it will spread throughout the entire Confederate Army. You've got guys in the Western Theater that are going to be using the rebel yell, just like the guys in the Eastern Theater there in Virginia. So it's crazy. You got a lot of stuff happening right there on Henry Hill in this small space, and it's the first time a lot of these things are happening. It's fascinating.
It's creative and fascinating, and also just one more thing to get into the enemy's head. The man approaching you is coming to kill you, and you're coming to kill him, and it's just one more thing to get in at somebody. So Jackson's charge was only the beginning of a bitter fight for possession of those 2 federal batteries, which would change hands at least 3 times as the battle surged forward and backward across the top of this hill. Jackson and his men are at the center of this fighting on Henry Hill, and for the next hour, they're going to take by far the heaviest casualties of any brigade that day. One Confederate described a strangely calm feeling that might have been something like what Jackson himself is experiencing in this battle, and he said, "This was a most novel sensation, hard to describe, a sort of warm, pleasing glow enveloping the chest and head with an effect something like entrancing music in a dream. But my observing, thinking, and reasoning faculties were normal. The time was about 3:30. As a result of the fighting on Henry Hill, Jackson captures the Federal guns. More Confederate troops were now on the field, having been ordered forward by Beauregard, and suddenly, as he observed, the whole of the open surface of the plateau was swept clear of Federals. And from that observation, after 2 hours of brutal fighting, the Confederates, they hold the hill."
So there's a few things this can be attributed to, but McDowell's midday lapse is definitely one of them. McDowell pausing there on Matthews Hill for that 2-hour time frame, he allowed Jackson to get set up in the best position possible. He had not all the time in the world, but he had enough time to get organized and really prepare for this fight. And as well as, the guys on Matthews Hill too. There was a lot of individual decisions made in this battle that dictated the way that it went. But by 3:30, Johnston's army from Winchester, that's the army of the Shenandoah, begin to arrive and bolster the Confederate lines, whoever hasn't made it, because Jackson is part of that army as well. But there's a few brigades that haven't made it yet, and they are now showing up. And these fresh, reinforcements are going to just smack into the Federals at the Henry House. And that's going to catch the Union soldiers by surprise. Suddenly you've got Union soldiers. They're exhausted. They've been marching all day. 2 a.m, they started that march. Then they get here and they get right into some serious fighting. As a result of that, man, these guys just broke. They broke into a full retreat. And with the loss at Henry Hill and Union lines in full retreat, McDowell is obviously in a panic state now. He's already told Washington he won the battle. Earlier on Matthews Hill, he's sending word back to Washington that we've taken the objective, and here he is. He's getting routed. One soldier wrote a letter home in reference to this happening, and he had this to say. As we approached its edge, the Federal line of battle appeared in view, which, as they perceived us, poured into our ranks a terrific volley of musketry that took effect upon several of the men of the brigade. It was a desperate undertaking, but upon the charge rested the fate of the Confederate army. At the command, with one wild, deafening yell, the Confederates emerged from the woods, and amidst a perfect storm of bullets, the gallant fellows rushed across the field. But they never wavered nor hesitated, and dashing up the acclivity, drove the enemy pell-mell from their strong position into the thicket in their rear, end quote.
Well said.
I mean, that's pretty descriptive.
Yeah.
So you've got a full-blown retreat now. You've got these Union commanders that are trying to rally the men, but everybody is seeing that this is just turning into a hopeless endeavor. And it's at this point that the guy we've talked about a few times, the Confederate cavalryman, Jeb Stuart, is going to charge into the Union troops, and this is going to cause what was a full retreat to turn into a complete rout. I mean, a panicked rout. These guys are now fleeing for their lives. Thousands of guys, running over ground they just fought so hard to get, and they're dropping weapons and gear the whole way. The whole way. This will be essentially how the Battle of First Manassas ends. I mean, the the Union troops are going to run that way the entire way back to Washington, D.C., the entire way.
Right.
And there's even like civilians that have came out to watch this battle, and they're calling them cowards and all kind of stuff and this and that and the other, trying to get them to stop and turn and fight.
Right.
Ain't no stopping that route until they got back into
Easier
D.C.
said than done.
Now, the Battle of First Manassas is a 9.5-hour fight. So just keep in mind, dude, those poor Union troops, bro, 7.5 hours hiking, 9.5 hours fighting. And it's the guys that hiked the furthest that fought the longest.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's miserable, bro. That's miserable.
All the way back to D.C.
So, I mean, it's a big loss for the Union Army.
What started out as looking pretty good, yeah.
Well, it's important to remember, man, the fight's not over until the fight's over, you know, and
True.
and listen, we always try to approach this from the understanding that we weren't there. We don't know everything that was involved. There might have been a good reason why McDowell pauses, and I just don't know about it, or whatever the case is. But that being said, there are things that could have, you know, and in hindsight with 2020 vision, looking back on this, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking could have been done better. But that being said, you know, I said at the end of the last episode, I got to tip my hat to the Union guys because this is their first engagement. It's a massive engagement. At this point in our country's history, this is the deadliest day in American history, right? Like the most costly day of battle we have ever had. And they're all brand new troops. They got no experience, you know. They've just hiked from D.C. to there over the past few days, and they did it through grueling terrain and over long hours. And then the fight itself lasts 9.5 hours. So they put up with a lot. They did a lot, and this isn't the end for them. You know, they did get beat here. The Confederacy won the battle, but as we all know, they didn't win the war. And those troops will go back and reorganize in Washington, D.C. after this and continue the fight for another 4 years.
And the ones that survived are now the nation's newest veterans, newest
Right.
combat veterans, and they're going to take their experience forward.
And it's a lot of good experience that they get. You know, Sherman even has he shortly after this has a little bit of a mental break, just because he realizes the cost that this war is going to be, and no one's taking him seriously, and everybody thinks he's kind of gone crazy. And it affects him. You know, he has to take some time off from being a field commander, but just shortly after that, he's gonna get assigned to, you know, join Ulysses S. Grant and become one of the greatest generals the war produced, and honestly, one of probably the first true modern general of world history. You know, the way he approaches warfare in the South later on in the war is the way modern militaries approach warfare.
Total war.
You know, so it's I mean, and not that total war is something that existed obviously back with the Romans and stuff, but Sherman is so strategic about it and the way he implements it, and it's a machine, and all you got to do is keep the machine fed, and it'll keep going. You know, like so you have all kind of experience gained from this battle, and and I think it also, you know, at this point everybody's thinking it's going to be a quick war. And I think as a result of this war, everybody realizes this is not going to be the quick thing we thought it was going to be. But that being said, man, that's it. That's the Battle of First Manassas, a Confederate victory, and quite a few, you know, very big historical firsts in this battle. It was a pleasure doing this with you, man. I had a great time.
A pleasure as always, and I look forward to continuing on and seeing how the changes are made and what's learned from this battle as we move forward and
Exactly.
cover more things as time goes on. So
Exactly. And
yeah.
thank you to all you out there for stopping in for another Hippocket History episode. We do appreciate it. Make sure to tune in again for the next one. And other than that,
Yeah.
we'll see you next time.
I'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, make sure you never miss new ones by subscribing to the show on your podcast app of choice. And if you want to help us out with growing the show and enable us to bring you better content and more of it, then Brett and I ask you leave us a 5-star rating and a review. They really go a long way in helping us out. Stay up to date with everything from America Fog of War by connecting with us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. As always, Brett and I thank you for listening, and until next time, stay frosty.